So moving to tuba, obviously you're an associate professor at a large university. What are some of your teaching responsibilities? What do you do at the University of Iowa?
Okay. Well, I teach applied tuba and euphonium, and that means giving lessons to my students, but I also conduct the university tuba euphonium ensemble. We call it Collegium Tubum.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of a Latin name my predecessor gave to the group. I kept it, but when I looked it up, it sounds like a fancy name for a group of tubas, but apparently tubum is the plural of tuber, which means we are a group of potatoes. So
sounds like a very tuba studio
it's
name.
yeah, I know, it's so funny that we just kept it, and pseudo-intellectual. But I conduct the Collegium Tubum, and we also have a studio class each week where either a guest does a master class or I do something, but most of the time 2 or 3 students perform in a mock recital-like environment so they can get ready for their upcoming juries, recitals, or solos.
Mm.
In addition to that, I teach 2 graduate classes. One is advanced brass ensemble literature, and that's throughout the spring. And so we listen to and study and do projects based on everything from brass trios to brass bands, brass choirs, brass quintets, quartets of multiple styles and nationalities. And the other graduate course is advanced brass pedagogy and literature, which I teach for half a semester. And it's a typical graduate course where graduate students basically take a course in how to teach,
Mm-hmm.
or how to be a professor. And when I learned that I had to teach the course, I inquired about what do you need me to do? What does that entail? And they basically said, whatever you like, this is what has been done before. And I immediately thought, well, I'm going to make sure that I teach these students everything I wanted to learn in college but didn't
Mm-hmm.
about the job. I only have a master's degree, so you call me doctor and I appreciate that, but I'm just professor. I don't want to be called master. And so I just want to acknowledge that because I really respect my colleagues who've earned their terminal degree, and I'd like to recognize that. So in addition to the grad courses and teaching my students, I don't have other responsibilities other than managing the chamber music for the brass area.
Mm-hmm.
And we're working on some exciting new things we're about to probably announce next year. And we're going to be bolstering our program in a certain way. And so those are my responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
But as all professors know, there's also service included. So
Yeah.
I'll sit on committees, attending recitals with students, graduate students that aren't your students. That's service. You can, help out with the School of Music or the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences or the university. And, the research aspect of being a professor
Mm-hmm.
for a musician is usually just creative work,
Yeah.
meaning giving performances, composing pieces, arranging works, conducting workshops, giving a master class, stuff like that. So, instead of writing 2 or 3 books, every couple of years, like some professors do in
Mm-hmm.
certain disciplines, us performers are just performing all over the world, giving master classes, making recordings, as well as, occasionally writing an article. So, I think you answered your question, what do I do here?
Yes. I've lost all sense of the English language.
Join the club.
Yeah, tying off of what you said about the pedagogy class, I am currently working on a graduate degree, wanting to be a student professor. When you have someone, because I'm sure it happens quite a lot in your daily life, when you have a tubist that comes to you as an undergraduate or as a master's student and says, I want to be a professional tuba player, what do you look for? What do you tell them?
Well, the first thing I look for is passion. Because if they don't have a passion for what they're doing, I don't think it's going to translate. Especially if they want to go into music education and be like a band director,
Mm-hmm.
And they're not interested so much in performing professionally, but as teaching, they definitely have to show a passion for music. Even if their euphonium or tuba playing isn't absolutely, top of the line when they audition,
Mm-hmm.
we can improve that over 4 years.
Yeah.
But if they don't have a passion for music,
You can't teach that.
you can't teach that. And people have to find their passion. Sometimes they find it later. But I think that's the prerequisite. There has to be a passion. Because if you have that passion and you have a lot of talent, that's great, but you also have to have that work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have as much talent as the next person, you really can make up for that by doing extra work. So I think besides passion, I would look for work ethic, what they're willing to do. Many times an undergrad, like if they were active in high school, managing classes, practicing athletics, being in orchestras and stuff, if they were able to juggle a lot in high school and get good grades, it's usually pretty good indicated that they're going to be successful in their college career. It's not a guarantee, but that's another thing I look for, someone who's already been busy and has handled a lot of things.
Very cool. So, going to the opposite end of the spectrum,
Uh-huh.
I don't know how much beginning tuba you play, or you teach, but what do you say to students that are just starting? How do you teach students that are just starting as far as breathing, tone, first building their sound?
No, it's interesting. I'm really glad you asked that now because just in the past year or two, we've started a community music lesson program here,
Mm-hmm.
and I've started teaching younger students. I have 2 or 3 junior high students and a couple of high school students, and I find myself, ironically, not saying too much about technique.
Mm-hmm.
Not getting too picky with sound right away. I just kind of evaluate where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, like a junior high student who wants lessons, there's, I think, a built-in amount of passion there already,
Yeah.
and drive. So I'm seeing really young students come in, and they already have a lot going for them. But yes, if a student has problems with tone and rhythm and articulation, we're going to be working on that. We're going to be talking about, using the right type of air and staying relaxed, and what basically to do with the embouchure without overthinking it. If there are, problems like, they're not holding the tuba or the euphonium right because they've grown recently, I might correct that. A lot of common problems are not understanding key signatures, which is very common. It happened to me when I was their age. You just think, well, that's a B, so it's got to be a B
Happens to
flat.
me now.
So it's got to be open, right? So learning new keys for younger students can be a challenge. So I even at 13 years old, I'm talking about the order of the flats and sharps and how to figure out major keys and things like that. And sometimes they encounter a note that's so high or so low they haven't seen it in band yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, because if we can prepare them for those ranges, when they do see it in band, they're going to be ready.
It's gonna be better, yeah.
So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, what do I tell young students? I think it depends on the student.
Uh-huh.
But I do try to make sure I have equal amounts of talking about music making and talking about the technique or the art of playing the tuba or the euphonium, because I think it all matters.
So I guess going off that as well, does your teaching style really change based on the age? Or are the same things you look for at a beginning 12 or 13-year-old, is that the same thing you look for in undergraduate, master's, and doctoral students?
I'm finding a difference with the younger students because I'm kind of new to that market, that age. I mean, I've taught a few very young students over the past 25 years, but I'm starting to teach more and learning more about it. My lessons with the younger students are usually a little bit more organic, kind of like, okay, what do you want to play today?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little more lenient about, okay, what did you prepare? Let me see this. You have to have these many etudes ready. And so I'm a little less strict with them. But as I work with them, I try to get them more into a system.
Mm-hmm.
Because my older students, my undergrads especially, know when it comes time to kick their butts, I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to push them. But for younger students, I'm not that aggressive. I try to be a little more lenient. But I also don't want to be the type of teacher that, like, the kid doesn't practice at all, it sounds the same, they're wasting their money and your time. I make sure that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But every single student is different, and their personality, their experience, their talent, and their passion. And yeah, there's no way you can teach every student the same. I have the same like ideas and suggestions and analogies and fundamentals that I will dish out when it's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not super regimented. I'm fairly flexible. But I do find I'm probably much tougher on my college students. And what I'm finding is that I think I'm going to aim more and more at trying to reach younger students. Because even a good player who's accepted in the studio who's 18, if they haven't had some fundamental teaching or not many lessons other than their band director,
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple of years of correcting bad habits.
Yeah,
Whereas if you get them like a year or two after they start playing the instrument,
you can get those good habits forming instead.
exactly. So I think I'm going to start expanding this young studio, and whether or not they come to the University of Iowa, it doesn't matter. But it's helping me learn to teach in yet a different way towards a different audience, and I'm seeing different results. So hopefully it'll pay off.
Yeah, very cool. One question I'm always curious about with professional tuba players and professors is, how did you get started playing the tuba?
I think I have a story similar to a lot of us tuba players, in that I did not start on the tuba. I'm not sure I've ever met anybody who started on the tuba. But I started on the cornet because my brother played it in 4th grade for 1 year and quit, and it was like sitting in our closet at home, and I said, "What's this?" And so I got interested. So I played cornet 4th and 5th grade, I think, and the usual story happened where like the one tuba player in the band graduated to high school, and the junior high band needed a tuba player, and they had a tuba but they didn't have a player, and so the band director said, just to the trumpet players, for some reason, would someone like to switch to the tuba? And of course, like 8 of us raised our hands because it's just kind of cool, right? And he said, well, as long as you're bringing a note from your parents saying you have permission to switch, I'll consider it. And because parents probably already spent a couple of $100 on the cornet. So my parents signed a note. I brought it in, and no one else brought a note in. So that's the power of paperwork, right?
Yeah.
So they authorized it, and I won the gig. And so, of course,
Your first gig that you won.
Yeah, but it didn't go well because the first day I took it home, I was so proud. I wanted to show it off. So I sat in my front yard and tried to play it, capture the attention of the neighbor kids, and this one neighbor kid, threw a golf ball down into the tuba. And I was like, oh no, what did you do? So I turned it to get it out, and I turned it the wrong way, and it went further in around the bow, and then got firmly stuck. So I brought it into my parents, and we tried like a coat hanger and tapping it with a piece of wood and running it under hot water or cold water, and we could not get the tuba out. So I couldn't literally play it. You couldn't get air through it. So this was before I even had my first lesson. I just took it home, right? So I go to my first tuba lesson in my life, and I have to go in there with my tail between my legs and say, Mr. Bose, I'm really sorry, but I got a golf ball stuck in my tuba. And he was like, oh, Manny, let me see. He grabbed the tuba. Well, no, I had the tuba next to me. And I pick up the tuba and give it to him. And he plays a few notes. He's like, seems fine to me. And I was like, really? And I look, and the golf ball was on the floor. So it fell out just in time.
Yeah.
So I think you started with, how did you pick up the tuba? And the answer is, without a golf ball in it. So it was a rocky start, but after that, I figured out how to practice, and he got me on my way. But then it was Jerry Shaw and the Sam Playfield that really helped refine my playing.
So at that point, when did the light bulb turn on? When did you realize that Tuba Euphonium was going to be what you built your life around?
Well, I think when I was a freshman and I transitioned into high school, I decided to join the band because my friend encouraged me. It was a fun group of people, and I was in the junior high band, so I said, sure, whatever. I didn't have much, I don't think I had any ambitions at that point. But when I entered high school band, there was another freshman and like a senior who were tuba players, and they were really good. Like, they were sounding great. And I literally said, how do you guys sound so good? What do you do? And they said, well, we take lessons with Jerry Shaw. I'm like, duh, okay, I'll call him. And that's how I started with a really great teacher. So, now I'm forgetting the actual question. What was the actual question?
When did you decide that Tuba Euphonium was going to be?
So, once I started taking lessons with Jerry Shaw, after a couple of years, I was like getting into district, and near the end I got into All-State, and I got into youth orchestra, and a youth wind ensemble that rehearsed at New England Conservatory. So I started to get more serious, and I think it was one of those things where like, it was a combination of, it's the best thing I do. It's like the only or one of the few things I'm good at, but I also enjoyed it a lot. And I don't think I realized it at the time, but I think I had a good bit of talent for it too, because it always seemed like music was kind of in me. And so I think probably maybe junior year of high school, when I was trying to decide what I was going to do for school, I was thinking, I think I'm going to go into music. And I was pretty sure I was going to go to Boston University. I only auditioned there and New England Conservatory. Toby Hanks auditioned me. And I got into both places, but I think because of my experience with Sam and my experience at BU, I decided to go there. So, and as soon as you start majoring in music in college, you think, okay, that's what I'm going to do for a career. And, of course, the initial goal is, well, the job you want is to be in a symphony orchestra. So I'm trying to refine my sound. I'm working on etudes and solos, but I'm also trying to learn my excerpts, which Sam guided me through all of that. But also, it was a huge component of brass chamber music, because the Empire Brass Quintet was in residence at Boston University, and it was a very active chamber program. I think probably the best ever. And so, I went in there for one thing and ended up getting another thing. I just figured, well, I'll just keep auditioning for orchestras. My first audition was for the Air Force Band in California, and I made that, and I left school halfway through my junior year to join the Air Force Band. And later on returned and came back not only to finish school, but to rejoin the Atlantic Brass Quintet. And I think it was, the Atlantic Brass Quintet was formed in 1985 when we were in school. I was, junior, and it was probably like the fourth quintet I'd been in at that time. So I left the group for the Air Force when they were only about 3 months old. So we'd only done some gigs, and we were good friends, and we played well. That's about all it was. But in the absence, while I was in the Air Force, they got better and better. They started competing, and they won every competition you could win while I wasn't there, except for one in France, which when I came back, we ended up going to Narbonne, and we won that competition. Also in the meantime, because they were assisting the Empire Brass, Columbia Artist Management from New York, who managed Empire at the time, came up to Tanglewood, and they were looking for younger quintets, because on their roster they had Canadian Brass, Empire Brass, and Dallas Brass, and they were looking for a younger quintet who basically would be able to take the gigs that, if somebody couldn't afford the Canadian Brass and the Empire Brass, but they still wanted a brass quintet, they wanted some other groups on the roster. So when I rejoined them, they were already touring the country, and so I hit the ground running when I returned back to the Atlantic Brass Quintet, and it's that group, the Atlantic Brass Quintet, and chamber music and Sam Palafin, that helped refine my career. And I had no aspirations or even thoughts that I would be a university professor. But as time went on, the amount of concerts out on the road and the amount of organizations that could host them decreased. And I was looking for a little more security, and of course I just started teaching adjunct at one college or another, and Sam Palafian left Boston University. I started teaching there, and we were in residence at Boston Conservatory in 1993. So I just started teaching like adjunct and resident faculty, that type of thing. And it wasn't until the late 90s when I got a job as professor at the University of Massachusetts, where I kind of felt as if I had like my own studio.
Mm-hmm.
When my daughter was born in 2000, wanted to get serious and wanted to get some job security, and at the time they weren't offering like a tenure situation in Mass Amherst, so I was looking for a little more security, and a couple of jobs came up during that time period, and I think maybe Georgia at one time and Penn State, and the next year Iowa came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been out here a couple of times with the quintet, and Louis Hanslick, who was in the Atlantic Brass Quintet at the time, he's now in the American Brass Quintet. He went to school here, and he said, "Hey, I hear there's going to be an opening for tuba. You should apply." And I did, and ended up
Obviously,
getting
you got the job.
You got the job. So that's how I ended up here.
Very cool. So I can close out. We'll do a quick lightning round.
Okay.
Just simple, off-the-cuff answers.
Okay.
Starting with, what is your favorite piece of music you ever learned?
First thing that comes to mind, I don't know if it's my favorite, is Prokofiev 5. Not only because it's an excerpt, but because when you listen to the whole thing, it's just a really good, it's like, it's modern enough to be challenging, but it's so playable in the tuba range that it's just so friendly. He wrote so well for the tuba. So I would probably go with Prokofiev 5.
Okay. And then conversely, what is the piece that if it comes up on the stand, you're like, oh no?
If I'm playing like with an orchestra or just singing.
Just in general.
It's a good question. I never tackled the craft. And I'm not saying it's come up on the stand and I said, oh no, but I think it's one of those things I've yet to conquer.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll conquer that next. Yeah, I think as a musician you have to always play musically and beautiful no matter what's on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have half notes, you have to phrase them.
Yeah.
So I usually don't find myself looking at a piece of music on the stand thinking, oh, this, I don't want to play this.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I get to decide what I play most of the time, so I just don't end up seeing on the stand things that I want to play.
All right, and then lastly, we'll close with, who's been your biggest influence? Whether not just tuba, but just in general.
Sam Palafian. Yeah. He was my first teacher. Well, he was my second teacher. My first teacher was a man named Jerry Shaw, and he was a fantastic, generous teacher, easygoing. He taught dozens of students, generations of students in my area. But when I was a senior in high school, I was in a youth orchestra and that rehearsed at Boston University, which is where Sam Palafian was teaching at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got connected with him and started taking some lessons in high school with him. I auditioned there and did my undergrad at BU when he was there. And after being with him in school, went into the Air Force, and then I returned, and for a few years Atlantic Brass Quintet was assisting Empire Brass at Tanglewood. So I had like a second level, like a chapter of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always teacher-student. I was always a student in my mind to him. And then a few years ago, and I would see him at ITEX, and actually sometimes that was the highlight of an ITEC, is to see Sam, because he's so busy and we lived in different parts of the world. But a few years ago, he was a guest for the Atlantic Brass Quintet Seminar, 2 years in a row. And he came in, he was like a whirlwind. He would work from early morning to late at night, giving way beyond what we asked of him. And he would stay until the last person stayed, working with students, coaching groups, giving us advice, coaching us. So he was a fantastic mentor. And my mentor, it was really tough to lose him this year.
Yeah.
But we'll do a lot of things in his honor this year.
He certainly left a huge legacy.
Huge, yeah.
All right. Well, once again, this is Professor John Manning at University of Iowa, the host of this year's iTech. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. Good luck with the site.
Thanks.
Thank you.